right, so I'm gonna walk you through what this board is showing you. But first things first, what you wanna do is you wanna damp wipe down your bisqueware to get all of the dust off of it. It may not look dusty, but because it's been sitting outside, you wanna use a clean, damp sponge that's not drenched. That's gonna grab that dust that you may or may not see, because that dust will create problems for your glaze to stick to your bisqueware, as well as fire onto your bisqueware. So you want to do that first and then lay those down to dry. It's also going to help with the absorption of your bisque, absorbing that clay, so it's kind of like a warm-up, so to speak. And then the thing to keep in mind about glaze is, one, not every glaze is one and the same. They all have different chemical compositions, which means they all react differently, especially if you're gonna layer them together. So the other thing you wanna keep in mind is that glaze is a medium in and of itself. So there's a lot you can do with it, but it's comprised of typically 3 different components. Clay, but not all glazes have clay in them. They also have glass formers in them, like silica. So with that being said, you want to avoid where your piece is going to make contact with the kiln with free of glaze, so that that piece doesn't glue itself to the kiln shelf. All right, so I'll come back to that because that's really important, but first things first, you want to free that area of no glaze. So whether you end up glazing that and you need to wipe it off later, or we can put a resist down so that when you do dip your piece in a glaze or brush a glaze on, that area is going to resist the absorption of that glaze, but you do need to wipe it off later so it's clean and it doesn't stick to the shelf. Now, coming to this board, this entire board is examples of the in-house glazes that we make for you. So not commercial glazes, just house-made glazes. So the top row, or sorry, this top row is that glaze first on every tile that is below it. Does that make sense? Are you sure?
I think so.
Okay. So in other words, this tile is metallic green, the one at the very top, first, and then the glaze that's on top of that, so the second glaze,
is what's on the left.
Is big blue.
Okay.
Okay. So this column on the left is the second glaze on that row.
Yeah.
Okay, of tiles. All right. So that's why this square is empty, because metallic green, metallic green. All right. So, but coming back to the nature of glazes, if you're gonna layer glazes, you can do that, but you got to be strategic and tactful with it, especially when it comes to the nature of the glazes that you're layering with each other. So, for example, glossy glazes have a lot more tendency in nature to move. They also tend to, not always, but they also tend to have a more volume to them when they melt, all right? So they appear thicker, regardless of your application, all right? And the consistency of that glaze when you're applying it to your bisqueware. So, for example, coming back to that metallic green, it's a glossy glaze. So, when you look down that column of when it's layered with another glaze, or even the row of when it's on top of another glaze, you can compare those differences and notice that it's got a lot of movement to it, especially when you layer it with another glaze. Now, it may not run as much when you put a matte glaze over it or under it, okay? Because matte glazes, visually, they can tend to have less volume to them and less movement to them as you look at these tiles. So the first glaze that you put on your piece is basically the vehicle of where those two glazes are going.
So if you do a glossy first and then a matte, it's still gonna run a little bit more than if you just did matte first and then glossy?
Yes, sometimes. Your chances are higher, yes. But it comes back to just the nature of that glaze, as well as the thickness of it. So if you're using glazes, or at least one of those two glazes that have the tendency to move when they melt, you might want to do a quicker dip to lessen that factor, unless you do want it to move, because that's the kind of effect you want, such as like Randy's red over the white, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe you do want it to get a little drippy. Therefore, you want to be cautious about how much of your piece that you're glazing, or at least with that glaze that tends to run. So for example, maybe you want that effect, but to be on the safe side, you don't want to dip that piece all the way down towards the bottom to prevent it from running all the way down onto the shelf.
And then sticking.
Exactly. All right. Which can create a nice design effect. Also, you can layer glazes, and you can do it in a more accent or decorative way. It doesn't have to be like the whole thing or half of it or just the inside or just the outside, right? You can be a little bit more designer with it, whether that's with like a sponge on a stick, like this, or like more circular sponge on a stick, or you can use a wax resist, which I'll come back to in a second, to create designs in between your layers, and I'll come back to that as well. But to acquaint you with how to get started with that, I'm going to use Randy's. You always want to stir the glaze, even if somebody just used it. You want to come in with a spatula or a whisk, whatever you got, and you want to make sure that you are scraping the very bottom of that bucket, because glaze does settle. Depending on the glaze, it can settle slow, it can settle pretty fast. But you want to make sure that you're lifting all of those materials and you're also scraping the side, so that as you stir that glaze, it's not different consistencies from the very bottom to the top of where, however much that bucket is filled at the moment. So for example, if I open a different color, like this one, it's settled and it's got dry glaze along the bucket. So I would want to scrape that off of the bucket so that I can stir that in. And that way, if I accidentally do bump my piece on the side of the bucket while I'm dipping, I'm less likely to have one of those dry boogers of glaze stick to the side of my piece. So I'm just gonna scrape all the way down the side, because as you can tell, when I pull that spatula out, it's not consistent. It's pretty thick at the bottom, so I need to stir really well and ensure that I'm lifting glaze off the bottom as well as the sides of that bucket. And I stir until I pull that spatula out and it doesn't have chunky monkeys or a thick area on the bottom of that spatula. Now there's several ways you can glaze. The most simplest and quick way to do it, especially if you're going to do your entire piece the same color, is to dip it. Now depending on the piece, it may not be ideal. What glaze color do you want to use? Do you care?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
I like this like blue, like this vibrant blue, but I don't really care.
Okay.
I would like this one to be food safe.
Okay.
The rest of them I don't really care.
So that's another thing you want to be mindful of, is making sure that your glazes are food safe. In this studio, we only have one in-house glaze that's not food safe, and that's the metallic green that I mentioned earlier.
Okay.
And it is labeled on the bucket, on the lid and on the bucket, all right?
Okay.
And that brings me to another one. Before you start mixing and stirring, don't just look at the lid. Make sure it's matched with the bucket. And there's also an example tile of that glaze attached to the handle. So make sure you're just using what you think you're using, right? Give that a stir. So that's still a little chunky on the bottom, so I'm gonna stir it some more. Now, if you just wanted, for example, this inside of this ewer to be blue, you can use one of those little pitchers, to load it up with your glaze. Make sure you don't have make sure it's clean. And you don't have a puddle of water in it, but just fill it up with a little bit of that glaze. Pour that over the glaze bucket, just in case you got drips and you just minimize your cleanup. And then as you pour this out, you want to slowly rotate as you pour that glaze out. Now, I did miss a few areas of the rim. I can flip this over and just dip that into the glaze so that your rim is fully covered. Now, also, I can do it with my finger as well. If you want, let's say you don't want that drip there, you can come in with a sponge or a metal rib and scrape that off, and you can let that glaze drop back into the bucket. If I had a different glaze on the outside of this, though, I wouldn't want to do that. As far as like scraping this, you don't want to contaminate that glaze. So you would just want to use your rib or sponge over the sink. But you see how this is wanting to get this crackle effect in there, as well as those boogers. That's glaze boogers. You want to just gently go in with your finger, especially since this is still slightly damp. The glaze is dry, but your piece is slightly damp. Now, if that flakes off, just let it, and you can come back in with a brush or your finger and just lightly get those, fill in that naked spot. But you want to lightly finger sand any bubbles or drips that you don't want. It will create a, like you'll be able to notice the difference in thickness between like that and if you had like a drip randomly going over that. And then, so if you wanted the outside of this to be a different color, you would want this to dry for a good like 20 minutes.
Even though outside or inside?
The whole thing.
No, but like, do you leave it outside to dry or
inside? Either one.
Okay.
Either one. The reason for that is the clay is still holding that water from the glaze. So even though this feels dry and slightly damp, you want to give your bisque some time to evaporate that water content. That way it can absorb a good amount of the next glaze that you're going to put on there. All right. Do you want this to be fully blue? Surprise you?
Yeah, go ahead. Surprise me. Do your big one, Ash.
All right, so I can dip this. I don't have to pour it. However, depending on the shape of that piece, so if I hold this by the rim, I'm likely going to remove that glaze that's on that rim. That's another reason why you want to let this dry for a little while. Also, because your foot is tapered inward like that, it's going to make it harder for me to hold this upside down and dip it into the bucket. So what I could do is let this dry a little while longer and hold it by the rim and then dip it right side up. Or I could have used the tongs very carefully and make sure, just hold it for a few seconds without like really gripping this, so that especially if your piece is a little on the thin side, you're not gonna like wobble around and lose control of your piece and drop it into the bucket or break your piece when you do actually like add a little bit of pressure in your hand to grip onto this. But I could just slowly dip this into here. However, you don't want to be super slow. You don't want to do more than a 3-second dip to one glaze. And if you're layering glazes, you actually want to be a little bit quicker than that. No more than like 1.5 to 2 seconds per glaze. That way you don't make your application too thick. All right. Now, I could have put wax resist on your foot to resist that glaze getting absorbed by the clay on that area, right? I would still have to wipe it down because the glaze would bead up on that wax resist. And the wax is going to burn off at like 500 degrees. The glaze isn't. It's going to stay there. So you still want to make sure that you're not leaving glaze there, all right, and causing problems later. Now I'm going to just set this down and let that dry for a little bit. And then I'm gonna wash my hands off, and then we'll go to the next piece. Now, if you want, speaking of wax resist, if you wanted to do like little designs on one of those little bowls there, like stripes or something, or like a checkerboard pattern, whatever, you can do that before or after your first glaze application. So in other words, if you wanted to decorate the outside of this with wax resist, you don't have to have glaze on the outside of that. Okay. Your clay is going to get vitrified, right? You would definitely want to line the inside, especially if you want to use this for food or drink, right? If you're using it for a plant, that doesn't really matter, right? But if you're using it for food, yes. But speaking of wax resist, let me grab the wax. You don't typically need to stir this, but you want to use a brush. Make sure it's clean. And the nice thing about wax resist is it does respond well to water, but you do, just for the sake of your brush, the lifespan of your brush, you do want to use soap to clean it. Now, since I have this out, I'm going to go ahead and wax your foot, not just the very bottom of your foot where it's going to sit on the kiln shelf, but you also want to do the inside of that foot.
Just so it doesn't drip?
Yeah. Now, until you learn the nature of these glazes and how you prefer to glaze your work, I recommend that you avoid glazing somewhere between 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 inch from the outside of your foot, okay? So I'm also going to wax the outside of that foot to also resist that glaze.
And what about the shallow part of the foot? That doesn't matter?
If it were more like that, that's much more shallow. You don't want to glaze this at all. Because you have more depth to this one, I think you're gonna be okay, but don't do more than one glaze on the bottom of it. Because the more glaze you have, the more volume it's more than likely gonna have as it melts as well, depending on the nature of those glazes. So let's go ahead and wax the bottom of this, and that'll just help your cleanup later. You could allow a little bit of glaze to be in your initials there and wipe it away so it's only in your initials. That a lot of times that can be a nice little accent as well. So put that in your back pocket moving forward. You might like that. But let's say you want to do like a fun little pattern on the outside of this guy, right? Let's dip it in the blue really quick. While that dries, I'm gonna...
How long do you let the wax resist dry?
It doesn't need long. I would give it several minutes, and then you also want to test it before you just start dipping it in glazes. Yeah, this is still a little tacky. You're basically waiting for it to not feel tacky. So if I go back to this guy, for example, I can do, with wax, I can do, start making like a square pattern. Everywhere where I want that pattern to be, right? Let that dry. So you can work on several pieces at a time while one piece dries and sets up, go to the next one. So I always recommend that you, especially since you're still a beginner at this, start with no more than like 3 to 5 pieces. And it's always helpful to have like scratch paper on hand, just in case you're waiting for paint to dry, right? Note down what you're going to do and what you've already done, because you will forget. If you've got to walk away for a little bit, maybe go trim a piece or throw something else while these are drying. And then come back to it before you leave. But that way, it's also just helping you keep it simple without easily overwhelming yourself.
Yeah.
Because as you already know, I'm sure, this can get overwhelming really quick, and you can easily lose your place and what your thought process was, what you were gonna do. So and I'm gonna dip this in basically a third glaze. So there's a very tiny amount of where there's gonna be 3 glazes. And it's at the top, at your rim. And I'm not worried about that going too crazy and being too thick and running all over the place and causing issues with your piece or the kiln.
Okay.
But you know, you can also do something like this with like a sponge on a stick, like a smaller one of these, or even like one of those circular ones, like a mop brush, I think is what they call them. Make polka dots.
Oh, cute.
Yeah.
Can I grab a brush?
Yeah,
My
absolutely.
handles you in your video.
You're fine. But yeah, you can do swirlies and stripes or whatever. But you basically want to make sure you're not seeing like something like that, because that means it's more than likely still wet. And if the downside to using wax resist over glaze for something like this, if you touch it, you'll more than likely like accidentally lift the glaze with it if it's still wet. So just give it a few minutes. That way that's less likely to happen. Glazes also have what's called flux in them to help all the materials melt together and get the result that you want. So between the glass formers, which is like silica, and your fluxes, create a huge part of that nature of the glaze.
And so that small part that didn't get any glaze, you don't want to put the wax resist on that.
Exactly. Now you can also use glaze as accents in other ways, like just doing the rim, right? Or a handle or whatever. Well, look at that. I ran into an issue. Oops. We're just going to leave it.
Yeah,
it's
perfect.
fine. It'll be great.
Amazing.
All right. You want to clean that brush like immediately, because if you don't, odds are it's going to be close to impossible to wash it all off without having to just like soak it forever.
Yeah. And if that does happen, what do you soak it in? Just water, or do you soak it
soap
with,
and water?
Soap and water.
Yeah, dish soap. Yeah. All right, let's do. What are we doing? We have big blue on the outside, right? Or no, that's the inside.
Inside.
We did olive green
On the outside.
on the outside. So what do you like with the olive green? So the olive green is first. So let's look down this column. And I also have what's the number of olive green?
520.
520. This is olive over turquoise.
Oh yeah, that one's pretty.
Yeah. It's going to be slightly different
That's okay.
with the other way around.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. So that's the other thing you want to keep in mind when you're layering glazes, is just because your result looks a specific way with this glaze over this glaze, when you reverse that, it's not exactly the same, right? So it's a good learning experience to play around with each. They may be really similar, but sometimes they're far from being similar. So is there, yeah, this is a perfect example of this right here. So raspberry over aqua right here. This is the reverse.
Right.
So that's two, well, raspberry is a semi-gloss opaque glaze. It's not matte or satin like the aqua is, but you see how that satin matte from the aqua absorbs a lot of that gloss from the raspberry when you put the raspberry over it. So, and same thing, but it's still a little bit glossier with the aqua over the raspberry in comparison.
Right.
Yeah. So, okay. So we're doing turquoise?
Yeah.
All right. Where's the turquoise? Ta-da. Yeah, if you're gonna dip or pour your piece, especially pour, you want to do it over the glaze bucket, preferably, so that you can empty all that excess glaze back into the glaze.
And do you always just want to have a cup to do it in?
You can have a little pitcher, any kind of cup or pitcher. Like if all you got is a recycled container and like use what you got.
Okay.
But something with a spout is preferred. Tools are tools. Whatever is going to help you make your job easier and more efficient. You do you, boo-boo. All right, so that's stirred. Now let's grab this. So this is dried for a minute now. And it's going to be a little tricky for me to grip onto the bottom of this. So I am actually going to hold it by the wax. See that? That's a good example. I'm going to hold it by the waxed areas so that we can get... Now this is going to be a really quick dip because you can tell that thickness of that first glaze is a good thickness. You don't want to go too thick, especially on a small piece like this, because it's a lot less surface area. So that was a very quick dip, and then I'm shaking the excess off so it's less likely to be too thick. And as you can tell, especially where that drip of the blue was, that's a really good thickness. I mean, just without being fired and having melted yet, it's starting to look as if it's like close to the same thickness as your wall. You know, you don't want that because that can cause some problems with your clay while it gets fired. So we're gonna set this down and we'll need to wipe the bottom of that really well later once it's dry and we can touch it.
Okay.
So now we need to clean this off. Don't leave your spatula in there. Make sure you put the right lid on the right bucket. And then we're going to go back to your little bowl because those feet should be dry at this point with your wax resist. So you want to make sure your hands are dry so you're not just adding a bunch of water to your bisque. But when you touch it, it's not tacky. I'm not lifting glaze or wax. Yeah, we're good. Same with this. You can tell it's shiny because it's wax resist. That's how you know it's on there. But it doesn't look wet, like white.
Yeah.
The color of the wax when it's still wet. All right, what are we doing next? With what colors?
Let's see. I like aqua green and this. Oh, but matte green. Yeah, that's fine.
What?
Let's do aqua green and matte white.
Aqua green and matte white?
Yes.
Okay. That needs water added to it. So that brings me to a good point. When you're stirring in-house glazes, especially, you want it to be, once it's all homogeneous, so once you've stood there and stirred it really well and you've scraped the bottom and the sides of the bucket, you want the consistency of that glaze to be like cream.
Okay.
All right. So thicker than water, obviously, right? And you don't want it too watery because then when you dip your piece or pour it into your piece is going to take a lot longer to dry, one. It's going to have a much thinner glaze application, right? Because it's absorbing a lot of water and less material. So, I mean, unless that's what you want your glaze to be on the thin side. But when it comes to a communal studio that has in-house glazes like this, that are made for dipping and pouring, you want that glaze to be the consistency of a cream. In other words, with very dry hands, very, very dry hands, after you stir that, you want to dip your finger into it. You don't want to see the texture of your finger as soon as you pull your finger out of there. So this looks thin now because it's dripping off of my finger. But when I initially dipped it in there and pulled it out, you couldn't see any of my my wrinkles and my knuckles. That's what you want. Without getting like really technical on glaze. So we can discard that, get this covered back up. So you said
Aqua and matte white, aqua green and matte white.
which, do you want them together or separate?
If you just want, which one are you doing first?
Doesn't matter.
I guess that's also true. Yeah, do them together.
Okay. So aqua with the white. That's what that looks like.
And that's this aqua's first and white's on top, right?
Correct. So matte white with aqua.
Yeah, I know.
Over it.
Yeah, I like it. I like this
Yeah,
better.
So, all right. So we're doing matte white first, then, or no?
No, aqua
No,
first.
Aqua first. Okay. So let's do this.
And we can just do like the aqua covers everything and then just the white on the outside, like covering it.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah. So let's do that. That's a good example for the video. So we need a clean spatula. Stir that. If a glaze is too thin, so once you stir it up really well, your spatula doesn't come out with a bunch of boogers all over it, and you stick your finger in there. I got a clean finger. That's pretty thin. Let's say that happens. I'm still going to use this. You have several things you want to do. One, you want to tell your instructor so that they can fix that once the glaze settles again. And because you're ready to glaze now, you can still use that. It's not too thin. What you want to do is do a slightly longer pour.
Okay.
Or dip. So instead of 3 seconds, do like 4 to 5. So you're getting enough material to get the result that you want. So we're just gonna do the inside aqua. So I'm gonna pour it over the glaze bucket, fill it up to the rim, give it several seconds, rotate as you pour out. If you don't want that glaze on the outside, you can use a damp, clean sponge or a metal rib to wipe that away. Set that aside, let it dry for a little bit while you glaze your next piece or start glazing your next piece. That doesn't look too thin. You can tell by the thickness at the rim, that's a perfect thickness. You also, if this were too thin, you would be able to see the texture of the clay underneath that glaze. All right. So as long as you can't see the texture of that clay, just like when you test with your finger, you don't want to see the wrinkles in your knuckles. Same thing after you glaze your piece. It's already dry. If this were really thin, odds are this would still be tacky wet and shiny.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So let's set that aside and start the next one. So what do you want the next one to be? Or actually, I'll let you glaze that one.
Okay.
You just have these 3 pieces, right?
Yeah.
All right, so I'll let you do that one. And then, what else? Is there anything I'm forgetting?
I don't think so. I mean, and then just painting on the glaze.
So if you want to brush glaze on, if you're brushing an in-house glaze, for example, those have a lot more water than most commercial glazes do, all right? And commercial glazes have additional materials added to them. One, to keep them suspended so they don't settle. And two, so that they adhere to your piece. And when you touch it, it doesn't dust off.
Right.
All right. So, and it's less likely to leave brush strokes and textures on there from your application. So if you're gonna brush an in-house glaze like this, it's a much thinner application than dipping or pouring. So you want to,
Really?
you
Okay.
want to keep that in mind. And the other thing you want to do with in-house glazes, when you're done using them, is you want to wipe the inside of that glaze bucket, so it's less dry glaze boogers that land in the inside of that wet glaze. And it's just less work for you to work it when you're stirring it and mixing it homogeneously. All right. Right lid, right bucket. Awesome. What else?
So when it is too thin, just let you know, and then you'll just come in and handle it after you're done.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not gonna give you like a science experiment to remember. Just on the basics with glazing. Oh, that's right. So commercial glazes. When you do use a commercial glaze, or if you're brushing an in-house glaze on, the same rule applies. You want to make sure that if you're layering it on over another glaze, you need to give that piece time to rest, to let some of that water content evaporate. That way you're less likely, because you're making more contact, like physical contact with that first glaze. So you don't want to end up moving that first glaze around, and that's going to change the results of how those glazes interact and flow together and cover your piece consistently. So there's that. You want to be mindful of all that good stuff. But with brushing, because it's a thinner application, you have to go through several more different phases to give your piece time to rest, to dry in between coats. So it is more work, right? And because like commercial glazes, because they have those added materials to them for suspension and less lift or removal when you handle your piece, you can get pretty painterly with them, like with accents, and not just like full coverage, but you can actually get some fun results if you're doing accent colors. So for example, if you wanted to just like do a thin stripe around the rim, and that is another little way that glaze, you can get pretty creative with glaze. And the thing with glaze as well is you can have a really awesome piece and totally fuck it up with your glaze. Yep.
Yeah.
You're just like in, for example, auto body, like the detailer makes the painter's work look amazing.
Right.
With how they finish it and buff that car off. Same thing with glaze on ceramic ware. Doesn't matter how you made that thing, the glaze can make or break it. You can have a really crappy piece that you don't care about, and you're just using it as a test tile for fun. You just total detachment. Guess what? Odds are it's going to look awesome.
Right. Always, whenever you don't care.
Yep. And that's exactly what clay is here to teach us, is detachment.
Yeah. So you just go in with the sponge and kind of clean up.
Now you see how thick that is around here? You definitely want to come in here, because that's a little on the thick side. So that's a good learning experience for you to learn a whole nother level of like thickness perception when you're glazing as you continue to make more and more work. You want to remove, especially out of this ledge, so you can use like a carving tool or a rib or a needle tool to get it out of a little less off of that inside of that foot. But that might actually be a nice accent with how it's ringed in here and in your stamp.
Yeah.
But you also want to remove some of this from the outside of that foot so that it doesn't destroy the bottom of your piece if it does end up running. Now we just put 2 matte glazes in combo with each other. So the olive green and the turquoise. So odds are it may not move much, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Especially since you have some drips, like one here,
Yeah.
one there.
And that's not something you want to kind of like smooth out with your finger or anything like that. You just kind of let it be.
You could, once it's dry, you could come back in and like lightly sand it down or shave it with like a metal rib or a trimming tool. I would recommend a metal rib, but yeah. You want to leave at least 1/4 of an inch, if not a little bit more, from that bottom ledge of your foot. I need a new sponge.
You want me to grab you one?
No, you're good. We made it.
We did it.
So yeah, I would let this dry and then get a little bit more glaze out of that inside of the foot.
Okay.
All right, but let's just set this aside for now. That's ready to go. You're gonna do this one. It's
Yes.
waxed and ready to go.
Yes.
Now let's finish this one. So we're gonna do the modified white, right? The matte white.
Yeah.
So you can tell by the coloration of this, the rim is still damp. You can see that discoloration because your rim is thinner than below that discoloration line. So that is a good indicator that if we dip this now, there's a huge possibility that one, it's going to take your rim longer to dry after we apply that second glaze. So it's going to be visibly wet for a while. All right. And two, it might cause that glaze to want to crackle, kind of like when we glazed the inside of your little ewer. It started to get the crackle effect in here. It might do something like that as well. Or worse, especially if this were wetter, it might start to actually peel off while it's trying to dry.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because of that moisture content. Because basically the clay and the glaze are drying at different rates.
And if it were to peel off, what do you do? Do you
let
just
it peel off, and you can
like kind of
let it-
patchwork it with your finger with some more, or?
if it's just starting to crackle, like it's wanting to start to peel away, you can lightly finger sand it and compress it back on there. A lot of times that helps. However, sometimes what ends up happening during the firing is that continues. So it'll actually start to crawl or sometimes splatter off of your piece. So that's why it's really important to give your piece some breathing room to let that first glaze dry. And you also don't want to fire your pieces wet. That can also encourage your glazes to like want to peel away or splatter or crawl off of your piece, is by firing them damp.
And when it does that, it's just like little chunks are left? Okay.
Yeah. Like it's got, not bubbles, but I don't know if you've seen them. It's been a huge trend for the last maybe a couple of years now. But like gloopy glazes, like they're just like a bunch of globs all over it. It's something like that.
Okay.
But like beads.
Got it.
Yeah. Now there
So it
are
adds the
glazes
texture and
formulated
stuff
to
like that,
actually
yeah.
do that, but you can actually create that just by just trying to get an even coat of your glaze on your piece, because you're going a little too fast, and that bisque isn't dry.
Got it.
Okay. So modified white. All right, here we go. Where is it? Matte white. Is that you? Yeah. I don't have anything in there, do I? Thanks, love.
And then with this other piece, since it has a hole at the bottom of it, would that be easier to just dip with like the tong things?
Say that again.
Since this one has a hole in it,
Uh-huh.
would that just be easier to just fully dip with this and try and kind of like hold it there and then just get one even coat of everything? Or would that be harder because it's thin?
That's a really good question. Regardless of what you're glazing and how you want to glaze it, if you are not sure and you think tongs are a good way, or you want to use the tongs but you're just trying to get familiar with how to use them and handle your piece with them, just practice with them before you get yourself set up and like start dipping and pouring. Because especially when you have a hole in your piece, that is going to dip really easily because it doesn't have that suction to it. It's just going to flow right through there. Because you have a shallow piece and we've waxed the bottom, if you do want that to be fully glazed on the inside, you could probably get away with like holding it like this.
Okay.
You might need to touch up a tiny bit right there, but even if you use the tongs,
You would have to touch up. anyways.
exactly, because those prongs are going to leave little spots in there that aren't, more than likely don't have glaze. So you'll have to go into at least 2, if not more spots where those tongs were touching your piece to touch those areas up. But you could probably just hold this like this and dip it like that, and you'll get full coverage on one dip. And you'll just have one tiny little spot on the inside.
You just
with a brush or your finger.
okay.
But regardless of what your piece is, before you use tongs like this, just practice with them. That way you're less likely to drop your piece into the bucket while you're in the middle of dipping it. And a lot of times when that happens, you at least chip your piece, if not fully break it, depending on how thin your piece is. So these aren't always the best option, all right? Even if you're doing the whole piece and you can easily dip the whole thing and get full coverage out of that piece.
And if you do drop it in the bucket and it breaks,
You gotta wash the whole damn thing off. Yeah, if it doesn't break, if you can re-glaze it.
yeah.
But honestly, you're better off just washing it all off, let it dry completely, and wipe the slate clean and start over. Yeah.
And you just do that in the sink?
Yeah.
Just, okay.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, like, with the tongs, which is what I've used before, but I don't like that it leaves the holes.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to do this entire thing in here.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the best method? Still the tongs, or?
You could, with how thin your pieces are, I would honestly recommend you pour the inside,
Okay. And then,
pour it out, and then do the outside. Or what you could do is you could dip it like this. So go down at least half, if not more than half, like so. Shake it off, let it dry, and then turn it around and do the other end.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you can do that.
Okay.
You will have a slight overlap. If you don't want that overlap, you can shave it down with a rib.
Okay.
But if you do want like the most even coat, I recommend pouring the inside, and then dipping the outside.
Okay.
Yeah, you bet. Now, speaking of which, if you did want to do like a line design of how you dip your glaze, that's another option. All right. So, for example, if you wanted to play around with these glazes to see how they interact, but you don't want the whole piece to be that glaze combination, for example, just a few areas. But you don't want it to be limited to the inside versus the outside, right? We could have dipped this into the aqua, let's say like halfway, like so, right? Let that dry, and then rotated it, hold it by the glazed area, and dipped it in the modified white, and just have, you know, this half aqua, this half white, but there's a small area where they're overlapping. That creates another design of where those glazes interact with each other, right? So that can create a nice accent as well. All right, modified white. Perfect.
Gorgeous.
It's like we know what we're doing.
You're a professional.
I know.
All right, so I'm gonna hold this by the foot. There are gonna be a couple of spots where my fingertips are touching the bottom of your wall that will touch up, unless you want to leave that alone. Some people like that kind of effect, that kind of maker's mark, right? But I'm gonna dip this whole thing into the white so that it gets in the inside of your foot.
Okay.
And that means it's also gonna get slightly on the inside, unless you can put wax resist over glaze, like I did earlier with that decoration, right? I can put wax resist over the inside of this, up to your rim, if you don't want those glazes to overlap on the inside. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Do you want to do that?
No, it's fine.
Okay, cool. Great answer. So,
I'm very easygoing.
excellent. Ta-da.
Gorgeous.
Now, obviously, glazes don't look anywhere remotely close to what they're going to look like once they melt, right, and get fired. So these two glazes look identical.
Yeah.
And that's another reason why I recommend for beginners, even though you've already done this before, but you're still learning a great deal about it, keep it simple when you start glazing.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what you want to do on that piece. Don't go crazy and just wait until the end and do like all of your pieces. Like just do a couple at a time. So you're less likely to feel overwhelmed and then like look at this board and you're like, I done forgot what the hell I'm doing and how to do it, right? You're less likely to get overwhelmed or forget where your place is with a piece that you're letting dry or something like that. Or heaven forbid, you are doing several pieces and you got your first glaze on all of them, and guess what? They're all different and they all look alike, right? Because the white looks just like the aqua, and God forbid that also looks like the clear, you know? So that's why I say bring in some scratch paper just in case and put it in your piece so you don't forget where you're at. So you see how you can see these little marks where my fingertips were touching? You can leave those. It may leave a subtle, maker's mark effect. I mean, that ridge there will soften. It's not going to be sharp. It shouldn't be. If you're worried that it is, or any of these boogers, you can just gently finger sand it. If you ever come across what looks like popped air bubbles, which happens a lot, finger sand those so they're less likely to be there after your piece gets fired as well. But yeah, your foot looks awesome. We don't have to clean any more off of that. You got a subtle drip. That'll be a nice combo where those overlap. Yep. And same with in there. So yeah.
Gorgeous.
Ta-da!
Amazing.
Yay! Anything else? Can you think of anything else, Morgan?
Wipe the floor with a sponge.
Yeah. We did that.
Okay. That's all
Any
right.
questions? No, I think that was
That's all I
Very
can
good.
think of for like the bare bones basics of glazing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, gorgeous.
Okay.
Well, thanks
So-
everyone. Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you bet. So when you're done, do you remember where you put these to get fired?
Don't you put them on that rack?
The rack right next to the door.
Yes.
Yeah, you got it. All right, so I'm gonna put this with your other one. You can go ahead and stop the
Okay.
video.